The Mafia loved calling itself a world of honor, loyalty, and respect. Very impressive on paper. In reality, a lot of their so-called sacred rules sound like they were invented by paranoid uncles, failed actors, and men who took table manners more seriously than murder. Today, we're going through 33 of the dumbest Mafia rules in history, and some of these are so absurd they make the gangsters look less terrifying and way more embarrassing. 1. In old-school mob culture, the same guy who could order a beating on Friday might still be expected to show up meekly for Sunday lunch with his mother. That was not just family warmth. It was reputation, community camouflage, and a strange form of emotional leash. A gangster could spend the week extorting people, then sit at a crowded table while his mother asked why he looked tired and whether he was eating enough. The comedy here is obvious. You are allegedly a feared man of honor, yet one raised eyebrow from mom can still turn you back into a 12-year-old who forgot to call. Mafia life sold itself as brutal independence, but a lot of it still revolved around food, family performance, and maternal approval. Hard to look like the underworld king when you are being told to have more pasta. 2. Some Chinese secret society and triad traditions had candidates roll up a trouser leg during ritual settings, and later, underworld recognition customs sometimes leaned on equally ridiculous little visual signals. Which brings us to the glorious absurdity of gang identification by clothing malfunction. In the dark chaos of a street fight, the idea was simple. Make sure your own side can spot you fast. The practical logic is there, but the image is still incredible. Imagine trying to look menacing while one leg of your pants is hiked up like you're about to wade into a muddy river. That is the weird beauty of organized crime. It wants to look like a shadow empire, but half the time it ends up inventing rules that feel like rejected choreography from a confused stage play. Efficient, maybe? Dignified? Absolutely not. 3. For years, members of the Yamaguchi-gumi and Kobe handed out Halloween candy to local children, which is one of those facts that sounds like satire, written by a very tired screenwriter. But it was real enough that police later moved to stop it. Think about the branding here. A criminal syndicate known for extortion, violence, and rigid hierarchy also wanted neighborhood points for being the spooky seasonal uncles with snacks. It was image management dressed as community spirit. The dumb part is not that it worked on some level. The dumb part is how openly theatrical it was. Nothing says public relations desperation quite like men from Japan's biggest underworld group trying to look wholesome because they remembered to distribute sweets on October 31st. It is organized crime discovering that even gangsters want good local reviews. Very sinister, very festive, very weird. 4. In the paper slip era of illegal betting, bookmaking lived and died on tiny scraps of evidence. Names, amounts, odds, debts, all of it could fit in your pocket and ruin your life in one police raid. So old underworld logic demanded one thing above all else. Make the paper disappear now. Tear it, burn it, flush it, chew it, whatever works before the cops can read it. And yes, old mob lore is full of bookies literally eating the slips, which is such a perfect Mafia image. Not a cool cinematic outlaw, just a panicked man in a back room chewing notebook paper because his criminal accounting system was apparently designed by lunatics. For all the talk of power and sophistication, a shocking amount of classic racketeering came down to one very advanced emergency protocol. Swallow your homework. 5. One of the most famous Cosa Nostra rule sheets ever found flat out said mafiosi were not supposed to go to pubs and clubs. Which is amazing, because these men spent half their lives orbiting places full of alcohol, cash, gossip, and shady deals. The logic was not morality, it was exposure. Bars and clubs meant noise, witnesses, loose talk, police attention, and the possibility that some idiot associate would start acting like he was in a bad movie. Still, the hypocrisy is delicious. Own the place, skim the place, use the place, maybe even kill over the place, but do not be seen casually hanging around in it like a normal customer. It is the mob's favorite trick. Commit crimes constantly while pretending the really reckless behavior would be ordering a drink in public. Peak criminal respectability theater. 6. The Yamaguchi-gumi, making members take written tests on anti-organized crime laws, is one of the funniest examples of criminals accidentally reinventing school. You join a feared syndicate with tattoos, hierarchy, and ritual, and then somebody hands you paperwork and says, basically, study harder or you will embarrass the organization. The reason was practical. Japanese laws were tightening, civil liability was getting riskier, and bosses did not want reckless idiots creating expensive trouble. But still, picture the scene. You reject normal society, enter the underworld, then end up doing a pen and paper exam about regulations. Somewhere, every disappointed teacher on Earth felt a tiny burst of vindication. Crime, it turns out, also hates incompetence. The mob likes to sell rebellion, but eventually even gangsters discover the ancient truth. There is always a test, and you still have to pass it. 7. The mustache ban sounds ridiculous until you realize it was partly about image. In American Mafia culture, older-style Sicilian gangsters were mocked as Mustache Petes, a label that basically meant old guard, old habits, old thinking, and maybe old opportunities for the police to stereotype you from across the street. So shaving became less about fashion and more about signaling that you belonged to the modern criminal corporation, not some dusty village-era relic. Which is hilarious. This is organized crime pretending it is not deeply obsessed with branding. You can run rackets, threaten judges, and ruin lives, but heaven forbid you look outdated. Underworld men who claim to laugh at society were still policing facial hair like insecure magazine editors. Nothing says ruthless secret brotherhood quite like a quiet panic that your upper lip might make you look uncool. 8. The old-school Vori Viusaconi, the so-called thieves-in-law, built their mystique around a code that rejected ordinary labor and formal loyalty to the state. Holding a legitimate job was seen as contamination, almost ideological surrender. You were supposed to live as a professional criminal, not a part-time outlaw who also swept floors for the government on weekdays. That is extreme dedication, but also deeply stupid because it turns survival into an ego contest. Imagine turning down a normal paycheck not because it is beneath you, but because it violates your outlaw purity. It is unemployment elevated into sacred doctrine. The whole pose was built on total opposition to state order, which sounds dark and romantic until you remember what it meant in practice. No legal work, no normal life, and a code that could make even basic adulthood look like betrayal. Crime as lifestyle brand, taken to a ridiculous extreme. 9. One of the Cosa Nostra commandments literally said you had to be available to the organization at all times, even if your wife was about to give birth. That rule says everything about Mafia priorities. Family is sacred, they claim, right up until the boss calls. Then suddenly your actual family becomes a scheduling inconvenience. There is something almost impressively cold about it. The organization loved using the language of honor, blood, and tradition. But the hierarchy was clear. The criminal family came first, your real family came second, and your wife in labor came somewhere behind punctual attendance. It is not just cruel. It is absurdly revealing. A system that constantly preached manhood and loyalty still expected you to abandon one of the biggest moments of your private life because some superior wanted proof that you were obedient. Nothing says honor like missing childbirth for organized extortion. 10. The Triads' famous 36 oaths are full of grand brotherhood language, but mixed into that dramatic ritual world are rules that feel weirdly petty and domestic. That is what makes them so fascinating. Secret criminal fraternities often dress themselves in epic symbolism, and then somewhere in the middle they start regulating etiquette like a very paranoid boarding school. One oath tradition is remembered as policing things as trivial as shared washwater and bodily propriety between brothers, which is objectively funny. You enter through incense, altars, blood, blades, and solemn vows to heaven and earth, and then part of the package is basically, please do not be disgusting around your criminal siblings. It is a perfect organized crime contradiction, massive cosmic theater wrapped around rules that sometimes sound like irritated household management. Mystical on the outside, awkwardly practical underneath. 11. Mob nicknames were not just decoration. They were identity, shorthand, intimidation, mockery, and sometimes a permanent insult you never escaped. The underworld loved these labels because they traveled faster than legal names and stuck harder than biographies. The dumb part is that you did not really get to curate your brand. If the streets, the cops, or your own associates decided you were Tommy the Rat, Johnny Bananas, or Mickey the Nose, congratulations, that is your legacy now. You can be rich, violent, feared, and technically very important, but history may still remember you by a name that sounds like a failed cartoon villain. Organized crime wanted men to project seriousness and honor, then turned around and let half of them sound like wrestling side characters. Few institutions have worked so hard to seem powerful while casually humiliating their own members for life. 12. The kiss of death is Mafia theater at its most melodramatic. A boss or senior figure marks a man for elimination with a kiss, and suddenly the whole underworld gets to cosplay Shakespeare with handguns. It is one of those traditions that may be part reality, part myth, part cultural exaggeration, but that is exactly why it belongs here. Even when it was not literally used in every case, the idea stuck because it perfectly captured mob vanity. Why quietly arrange a murder when you can add a symbolic flourish like a doomed opera villain? The smart criminal move is secrecy. The dumb move is turning assassination into a recognizable gesture that everybody remembers forever. The police might not solve every killing, but thanks for leaving behind a signature so famous it became global shorthand. Very subtle, very elegant, very stupid. 13. The rule that one mafioso could not just introduce himself directly to another is peak underworld bureaucracy. There had to be a trusted third party who knew both men and could vouch for the meeting. In theory, this reduced infiltration, misunderstandings, and stupid freelancing. In practice, it made criminal networking sound like a medieval court ritual crossed with awkward office politics. Imagine being a violent racketeer and still needing a mutual contact to say, "Yes, this is one of our friends. Please proceed with the extortion. It is security through social choreography." And sure, it makes sense in a secretive organization, but it is also funny that men who prided themselves on toughness could not even say hello without procedural clearance. The mob always wanted to look like pure instinct and danger. Then you find out half of it ran on introductions, etiquette, and the emotional energy of a private members club. 14. The Burning Saint picture in Cosa Nostra initiation is one of the clearest examples of the Mafia borrowing sacred imagery and turning it into loyalty theater. A recruit's finger is pricked, blood touches the image of a saint, the picture is lit, and the initiate is told that betrayal will make his flesh burn the same way. It is painful, memorable, symbolic, and completely insane. This is not a corporation. This is not just a gang. This is a secret ritual designed to hardwire fear straight into your nervous system. And that is exactly why it worked. But it is also dumb in the most mafia way possible, because it takes religion, loyalty, pain, and drama, and mashes them into a ceremony that feels like a cursed school play about eternal damnation. Organized crime loves paperwork when convenient, and medieval fire symbolism when that feels more persuasive. Very modern, obviously. 15. Old mob culture treated shared meals as serious social glue. And within that world, the dinner table could become a temporary neutral zone, or at least a place where certain business talk was supposed to be handled with care. That sounds civilized until you remember who we are talking about. Men perfectly comfortable with extortion and murder, suddenly pretending there are standards because the pasta has arrived. It is the hypocrisy that makes this great. The same organization that could bury somebody in concrete still liked the fantasy that food deserved respect, timing mattered, and some lines should not be crossed while everyone was chewing. In fairness, meals really were central to mafia belonging. In less fair terms, it is very funny that gangsters who solved disputes with bullets could still act scandalized by bad dinner etiquette. Criminality ends where table manners begin, apparently. 16. Al Capone understood something a lot of gangsters understood instinctively. Fear works better when it is dressed well. Expensive suits, polished shoes, quality hats, clean presentation, all of that helped transform ordinary thugs into something more intimidating and more respectable at the same time. It was costume as power. Capone did not want his people looking like alleyway chaos. He wanted them looking like they belonged in the room, owned the room, and maybe financed the room. That part was smart. The dumb part is how seriously criminals took the illusion. You are still a racketeer, sir. The silk does not change that. But mob culture often acted as if a sharp suit could bleach the violence right out of the business model. Underworld fashion was basically armored hypocrisy, tailored cloth wrapped around men trying very hard to look like executives instead of predators. 17. One of the clearest Cosa Nostra rules said, never look at the wives of friends. Which sounds noble, until you remember how often mob culture tolerated mistresses, cheating, and endless masculine hypocrisy everywhere else. That is what makes the rule so funny. It was not really about morality. It was about internal stability. Sleep with the wrong woman and suddenly, you do not have a love triangle, you have a funeral. So the ban was less respect women, and more, stop creating blood feuds because you cannot control yourself for 5 minutes at a christening. Even in the underworld, married men who broke laws for a living still wanted some domestic boundaries around their own property and pride. Mafia ethics are always like this, not universal principles, just a list of behaviors that become unacceptable once they threaten the club from the inside. 18. In Triad initiation, the altar, incense, offerings, and symbolic space mattered enormously, which meant even small physical acts could count as grave disrespect. So yes, stepping over the incense burner was treated as a serious offense in ritual logic. To outsiders, that sounds bizarre. To the organization, it made perfect ceremonial sense. You were not just entering a gang. You were entering a sacred performance of hierarchy, loyalty, myth, and obedience. Still, it is objectively hilarious that a future criminal involved in extortion, smuggling, or violence might fail a spiritual threshold test because he moved his feet wrong near a smoking pot. Organized crime loves to market itself as raw street power, but under the hood it is often full of delicate ritual nerves. One careless step and suddenly the underworld is offended like an angry temple usher. 19. Old mob wisdom often hated anything traceable, which is why cash was king and cards were suspicious. A credit card is convenient for normal life. For a criminal, it is a polite little tracking device that stores time, place, amount, and patterns for investigators who enjoy ruining your week. So the underworld preference for cash was not superstition, it was survival. But it is still funny how macho criminals talked about it, as if refusing plastic made them ancient warriors instead of men terrified by paperwork. The same people who could run elaborate frauds and loan sharking schemes suddenly turned into cash-only traditionalists because modern banking leaves receipts. Which, to be fair, it does. Still, there is comedy in watching self-proclaimed masters of crime defeated by the horrifying possibility of a monthly statement. The mob feared many things. Apparently, itemized transactions were one of them. 20. Yakuza groups have long been described as supporting jailed members and their families, and in some accounts even rewarding that sacrifice after release. Which means they basically developed a criminal version of employee benefits. Go to prison for the group, and instead of being forgotten, you may get financial support, status credit, or a future bump up the ladder. That is efficient but also deeply surreal. It is like corporate human resources wandered into organized crime and decided incarceration counted as a team-building exercise. The smart part is obvious. Loyalty becomes easier when the clan takes care of your household. The dumb part is the image. You join a feared syndicate expecting danger and swagger, and end up in a system with prison compensation logic and post-sentence incentives. Gangster mythology promised chaos. What you got was a disturbingly functional benefits package. 21. Once a man was made, he was not just a member. He became symbolically untouchable unless the proper authority approved action against him. That rule protected hierarchy, reduced random chaos, and reminded everyone that rank mattered more than personal rage, which is useful. It is also absurd, because it means a lower-level thug could be insulted, slapped verbally, humiliated, maybe even provoked beyond reason, and still have to absorb it because titles outranked emotion. Organized crime loves pretending it runs on strength, but underneath it often runs on protocol. You are not free to hit the man who disrespected you because his paperwork is stronger than your fist. There is something wonderfully pathetic about that. A violent secret society full of armed men still needing an authorization flowchart before somebody can punch upward. Very tough. Very noble. Very administrative. 22. Hand-kissing and ring-kissing in Mafia. Imagery symbolize deference, hierarchy, and almost feudal submission. Whether every crew used it all the time is another question, but the gesture became attached to mob power for a reason. It visually says, "This man is above me, and I am acknowledging that in public." Which is exactly why it belongs on this list. Because once you strip away the myth, it is grown men in criminal suits performing old-world reverence rituals like they are serving in some smoky gangster monarchy. The Mafia loved presenting itself as modern, disciplined, and ruthless, yet it kept returning to symbols that screamed medieval boss worship. Respect is one thing. Turning your greeting into a ceremonial reminder that another man owns the room, the rules, and maybe your lifespan is something else. Organized crime, again, cannot resist dramatic staging. 23. For a long time, becoming a made man in the American Mafia usually required full Italian ancestry, and in some periods that standard was policed with absurd seriousness. This was a criminal empire handling gambling, murder, extortion, labor rackets, and political corruption. Yet somehow it still found time for bloodline gatekeeping like a very insecure aristocracy. The rule was about trust, tradition, kinship, and ethnic continuity, but it also made the mob look ridiculous. You can cooperate with Irish gangs, Jewish gangs, corrupt businessmen, and bent officials when money is involved, yet membership itself becomes some sacred genetic puzzle. Organized crime keeps doing this, acting like it is above society while copying the snobbiest parts of it. Nothing says rational enterprise quite like telling a loyal, profitable, violent associate that he is still not eligible because the family tree on one side is not Italian enough. 24. Some mafia rules went even further and treated police connections in the family tree like contamination. A close relative in law enforcement could make a man unacceptable for membership because divided loyalties, future pressure, and bad optics were all terrifying in a secret organization. From a security standpoint, that makes sense. From a human standpoint, it is hilariously extreme. You could be willing to commit crimes, keep secrets, earn money, and prove loyalty for years, yet some distant family branch with a badge might still block your career in organized crime. Imagine failing the recruitment process for Murder Club because your uncle chose public service 2 decades ago. The mob always claimed to judge men by loyalty and usefulness, then turned around and acted like genealogy was destiny. Criminal meritocracy lasted right up until Thanksgiving introduced the wrong cousin. 25. Across drug worlds, one of the oldest rules is some version of do not use your own product. The logic is brutally simple. Addiction makes you weak, sloppy, emotional, indebted, visible, and stupid. In other words, bad for business. Even a cartel understands that a man high on inventory is one bad decision away from becoming a liability with a pulse. So yes, the rule is practical. It is also gloriously hypocritical. Criminal organizations willing to poison entire communities still draw the line at their own staff losing focus. That is where conscience suddenly appears. Except, of course, it is not conscience. It is workflow protection. What makes the rule memorable is how bluntly it exposes the business mentality underneath the violence. Ruin strangers if it pays, but do not ruin the employee performance metrics. The underworld may be evil, but it still hates inefficiency. 26. One of the least stupid criminal instincts somehow became one of the funniest rules. Do not bring maximum chaos onto your own street. In gang and cartel logic, that can mean no kidnappings, no flashy violence, no heat where you sleep, collect, eat, and recruit. Because once your own neighborhood starts hating you, informing on you, or panicking under police pressure, business gets uglier fast. So yes, the principle is sensible. The funny part is what it reveals. Even monsters understand zoning. They can rationalize kidnapping, but apparently the real problem is poor location strategy. It is the same mind that says murder is negotiable, but local inconvenience is unacceptable. Criminal empires often survive by managing ordinary life on their turf, so rules like this are less moral than managerial. Evil, yes. But please keep it off my block. Very considerate in a deeply cursed way. 27. Another line from the famous Mafia commandments said appointments had to be absolutely respected, which means punctuality was not just manners. It was discipline, hierarchy, and proof that you were not an unreliable idiot. And honestly, nothing captures Mafia absurdity better than this contrast. These are men engaged in extortion, smuggling, and murder, yet lateness is treated like the truly disgraceful behavior. Somewhere in that world, a guy could probably dodge taxes, intimidate witnesses, and plan a killing, but still get a lecture because he arrived 12 minutes late. That is the mob in one image. Savage priorities wrapped around old-world etiquette. It makes sense, of course. Meetings are dangerous, schedules matter, and disrespect is contagious. But it is still funny that organized crime sometimes sounds less like a nightmare syndicate and more like a furious grandfather who cannot believe you missed the agreed time. 28. Mafia culture has long wrapped itself in Catholic imagery, sacred language, saints, processions, and family piety, which created one of the strangest hypocrisies in organized crime. Some clans treated the church as symbolically protected territory, or at least as a place requiring special caution. Not because the mob was moral, obviously, but because posing as devout while attacking religious institutions too openly was bad for legitimacy in deeply Catholic communities. That is what makes this rule so ridiculous. Extort shopkeepers, corrupt officials, terrorize rivals, but maybe do not squeeze the priest too visibly because we still need to look respectable under the statue of the Virgin on Sunday. It is criminal branding dressed as reverence. The Mafia often wanted the aura of religion without any of the ethical inconvenience. Sacred image, profane business model. Classic combination. 29. Taking the fall for the boss is one of the most underworld ideas ever invented. In ordinary life, going to prison means disaster. In Mafia logic, it can become proof of loyalty, a ticket to future promotion, or at least a way to keep the chain of command intact while some lower-level man absorbs the punishment. That is darkly efficient. It is also deeply stupid in human terms. You are being asked to sacrifice years of your life, your family, your health, and your future so somebody above you can continue earning. And the organization calls that honor. The weird genius of the system is that it makes betrayal feel shameful and self-destruction feel noble. Nothing reveals the mob's manipulation better than this rule. A true believer does not fail when he goes to prison. He becomes useful. Very inspiring if your dream job is disposable shield for a richer criminal. 30. For decades, American mafiosi publicly denied that the mafia even existed. That was the line. There is no organization, no structure, no membership, no thing to discuss. Which is hilarious because the government, the press, rival criminals, neighborhoods, and eventually informants were all staring straight at a very obvious organization. The denial mattered because names create legal and political pressure. Admit the structure, and suddenly prosecutors have something clearer to target. So the lie had strategic value. Still, imagine how exhausting it became. Entire generations of gangsters acting offended by a reality everyone could see. Like children insisting the giant cake on the table has absolutely not been touched despite frosting all over their faces. The mob's favorite fantasy was always invisibility. Its favorite weakness was believing performance could erase substance. It could not. Joe Valachi blew that fantasy apart in public. 31. Many bosses understood that killing journalists, judges, or high-profile political figures was terrible for business because it could trigger national outrage and a state response far bigger than whatever short-term problem the murder solved. Sometimes that caution held. Sometimes it absolutely did not. And when mafias crossed that line, the backlash could be enormous. That is why the rule is so revealing. It was never about decency. It was about heat management. You are free to be monstrous, just do not do it in a way that wakes up the whole country at once. That is the strategic brain of organized crime talking. but it is still breathtakingly cynical. Human life is treated like media calculus. Kill ordinary people quietly, maybe. Kill the wrong public figure, and suddenly even gangsters rediscover restraint. Not ethics, just public relations with explosives. 32. Omerta, the code of silence, is probably the Mafia's most famous rule, and maybe its dumbest in pure human cost. Stay silent. Do not cooperate. Do not inform. Do not explain. Do not save yourself by exposing others. In theory, this protects the organization. In reality, it often means lower-ranking men rot in prison while bosses hope fear, loyalty, and mythology keep the structure intact. The code sounds grand when whispered in dark rooms. It sounds much less grand when somebody loses decades of life protecting people who may already be replacing him. And yet it was powerful because it turned speaking into betrayal and suffering into identity. That is the cruel brilliance of it. Omerta made silence feel like manhood. The mob sold it as honor. Quite often it was just a way to keep the machinery fed with obedient human parts. 33. One of the Mafia commandments literally said, wives must be treated with respect, which sounds lovely until you place it beside the actual culture of mistresses, side relationships, vanity, and non-stop masculine hypocrisy. That contrast is exactly why this rule belongs here. The Mafia adored respectable family imagery. Wife, children, church, table, tradition, all of it helped create the mask of honorability. But behind that mask, many mob worlds tolerated behavior that made the commandment look more like public relations than virtue. Still, the rule mattered because wives anchored status, lineage, and social legitimacy. You respected the wife not necessarily because women were honored in some noble way, but because the image of the household had to remain stable. It is classic mob morality. Say something wholesome, violate the spirit constantly, and act offended if anyone notices the gap. They ruled streets with fear, but couldn't operate a phone without calling 911 on themselves. This isn't the Mafia you've seen in movies. This is the raw, ridiculous reality they hoped you'd never find out. Mobsters busted by pastry cravings, botched disguises, and a YouTube cooking channel? Yeah, it gets that dumb. You're about to witness the most embarrassingly stupid moments in Mafia history. And once you do, the myth of the criminal mastermind will never look the same again. 1. We've all had that moment of pure panic. The accidental butt dial to an ex, your boss, your mom. But a low-level mobster from New Jersey decided to take that game to the pro league. This dude accidentally called 911 from his pocket while he and his crew were casually discussing their criminal enterprise, including, planning a murder or two. He didn't just call the cops. He gave them a front-row seat to a live-streamed podcast titled, How to Be a Terrible Criminal. You have to imagine the 911 dispatcher putting them on speaker for the whole office, like, you guys gotta hear this, Brenda's making popcorn. This guy single-handedly invented the concept of self-snitching. He provided the motive, the means, and the full confession, all neatly packaged in one accidental phone call. He was the rat, and his phone was the informant, making it the easiest police investigation in human history. 2. Being a high-ranking mobster under FBI surveillance requires a certain level of finesse and subtlety. Anthony "Tony Boy" Zinzi had the subtlety of a monster truck rally in a library. While the feds were watching his every move, Tony Boy got a craving for some quality entertainment. So he strolled into a store and shoplifted a DVD. The movie he risked his freedom for? Goodfellas. Let that sink in for a second. This is like a shark getting arrested for stealing the movie Jaws. The FBI agents must have been crying with laughter in their surveillance van. He risked decades in federal prison for a $10 disc. The universe has a strange sense of humor, but this was a straight-up punchline delivered directly to law enforcement. A mobster, being watched by the cops, stole a movie about mobsters. You can't write comedy this perfect. 3. A good disguise should make you blend in, become invisible. Salvatore, Sammy the Horse. Galante's disguise made him stand out like a Sasquatch at a dog show. In an attempt to lose a police tail, Sammy the horse put on a woman's wig and a lovely floral dress. A solid plan, except for a few minor details. Sammy was 6'3", weighed 285 pounds, and rocked a mustache that looked like two squirrels fighting on his upper lip. He looked less like an inconspicuous woman and more like a linebacker who lost a bet. The one thing he needed to change, the mustache, he kept. The cops didn't just spot him. He became a local landmark. They probably started giving directions based on him. Yeah, take a left at the giant hairy dude in the sundress. If you hit the guy who looks like a confused bear in drag, you've gone too far. 4. In what sounds like a rejected script for a Looney Tunes episode, a mobster named Vincenzo Curri, whose nickname was Vinny the Fish, decided to rob a fish market. He walked in trying to look all tough and menacing, gun out, ready to be a big shot. And then, because the universe loves irony, he immediately slipped on the wet floor because, well, it's a fish market. He went down with all the grace of a bowling ball on ice, his gun skittering away into a pile of shrimp. Before he could even say Mamma Mia, the fishmongers he was trying to rob piled on top of him and tied him up. He wasn't taken down by a SWAT team. He was neutralized by a bunch of guys in aprons who smelled faintly of salmon. His own brand identity betrayed him in the most hilarious way possible. 5. A hitman for the Colombo family was all set for a professional, quiet assassination. He had the target, the location, the getaway car. He was a real pro, except for one tiny crucial detail from his shopping trip. When it came time to screw the silencer onto his pistol for that classic movie-style puffed puffed, he discovered the threads didn't match. He bought the wrong model. This is the organized crime equivalent of showing up to build an IKEA bookshelf with a Phillips screwdriver when you need an Allen key. Imagine the sheer, silent frustration of that moment. You're hyped up, you're ready for some wet work, and you're thwarted by bad product design. He had to abort a mob hit because of an equipment compatibility issue. What's next? Calling off a shakedown because your Wi-Fi is down? 6. If you're a wanted fugitive, your to-do list should be pretty short. Number 1. Do not get caught. What shouldn't be on that list? Updating your Facebook status every 10 minutes. An Italian mafioso who was on the run for years just couldn't resist the sweet, sweet allure of social media clout. His desire for likes was apparently stronger than his desire for freedom. He was posting food pics from his hideout, vacation selfies, probably even inspirational quotes over a sunset. He was basically creating a digital breadcrumb trail right to his front door, tagged with "Fugitive Life Blessed." The police didn't need a high-tech surveillance unit. They just needed an intern with a Facebook account. He wasn't outsmarted by a rival gang. He was brought down because he was too thirsty for likes. 7. Every family has that one relative who becomes a legend for all the wrong reasons. For the Philly mob, that was Salvatore Chucky Merlino. After what we can only assume was a legendary amount of booze, Chucky was arrested for a DUI. But he wasn't swerving in a Lincoln Continental. No, this absolute genius was pulled over while driving a lawnmower on a public highway. This is peak hold my beer and watch this energy. He was treating a John Deere like it was a Harley Davidson, chugging along in the slow lane while 18-wheelers blasted past him. This wasn't just a crime. It was a cry for help that smelled like cheap whiskey and freshly cut grass. You know you've made some poor life choices when your getaway vehicle has a maximum speed of 5 miles per hour, and its primary function is to trim your front yard. 8. When you work for a guy named Tony the Ant Spilatro, you're expected to be intimidating. Frank Collada's disguise for a robbery was intimidatingly bad. His brilliant plan to hide his identity involved a fake mustache that looked like it was shedding, and a wig that appeared to be a dead animal he found on the road. It was so transparently awful, so laughably low effort, that a witness immediately identified him, probably because they thought, who else would wear a disguise that stupid? It was less of a mask and more of a party favor. He might as well have worn a t-shirt that said, "I'm definitely not Frank Collada, please ignore my face." The disguise itself was a bigger crime than the robbery he was attempting. He wasn't a master of disguise, he was a master of disaster. 9. When you hear active mobster, you probably picture a guy in his prime, full of vigor and menace. You don't picture a grandpa who needs a nap right in the middle of a workday. But meet John Sonny Francesi, who at the ripe old age of 93 was still technically on the job as an underboss. His last great act of gangsterism was attempting to shake down a New York strip club. But in the middle of laying down the law, Sonny did what any 93-year-old would do after a long day. He fell asleep. Right there, mid-shakedown. The guys he was trying to intimidate must have been incredibly confused. Are we supposed to be scared? Should we get him a blanket? It's the least intimidating power move in the history of organized crime. This wasn't a power nap. It was a career-ending snooze that led directly to the FBI using the recording of his snoring as evidence in his final conviction. 10. In the golden age of reality TV, it seemed like everyone wanted their own show, a chance at 15 minutes of fame. Even apparently, the guys who were supposed to live their entire lives in the shadows. Louis Big Lou Valerio, a bona fide mafioso, decided he was ready for his close-up and auditioned for a pilot about the mob lifestyle. To prove his authenticity and street cred to the producers, he basically gave them a masterclass in mob secrets, spilling beans that had been hermetically sealed for decades. The show, predictably, was a spectacular flop and never even aired. But the pilot episode? Oh, it found an audience. A very dedicated, very attentive audience at the FBI. They got their hands on the footage and used it to build a rock-solid case against him. He traded the sacred code of silence for a shot at becoming the next Snooki and ended up getting a long-term, all-inclusive contract with the federal prison system. 11. When you're a high-ranking boss in the Camorra and you're on the run from the entire Italian state, your list of priorities should be pretty simple. Stay hidden, don't get caught, stay alive. But for one boss, Ferdinando Chirano, there was a third, far more pressing priority: maintaining a killer, year-round tan. Despite being one of Italy's most wanted men, Chirano simply could not give up his regular visits to his favorite tanning salon. His vanity was literally his Achilles heel. The police, knowing his pathological obsession with looking like a bronzed god, didn't have to launch a nationwide manhunt. They just had to stake out the place with the best UV beds in Naples. You can just picture him, lying there blissfully, thinking about his criminal empire, while the cops are waiting outside to arrest his perfectly moisturized, golden brown self. He chose looking good over freedom, a decision that is both tragic and hysterically stupid. 12. The Witness Protection Program has one very simple, non-negotiable rule. You tell the government everything you know, every dirty little secret, and in return, you get a new life as a Cinnabon manager in Nebraska. Frank Salem, a powerful Boston mob boss, seemed to have missed the "tell us absolutely everything or the deal is off" part of the contract. After entering the program and starting his new life, the authorities discovered he'd conveniently forgotten to mention a tiny, insignificant detail from his past: the fact that he'd personally strangled a nightclub owner to death. That's not like forgetting where you left your keys. That's like forgetting an entire season of a TV show where you were the main character and the plot was murder. When confronted, you can almost hear him saying, "Oh, that murder? My bad. It totally slipped my mind." Unsurprisingly, the feds revoked his get-out-of-jail-free card immediately. 13. For some people, fashion is life. For one Philadelphia hitman, fashion was, quite literally, a life sentence. After a mob hit, the police had very little to go on. No witnesses who would talk, no fingerprints, just some grainy surveillance footage. But on that footage, they saw the killer's feet, and those feet were sporting a pair of unique, ridiculously expensive, high-end sneakers. His impeccable taste in footwear became his undoing. The feds didn't need to track down a seasoned criminal. They just needed to find the one guy in Philly with a $1,000 sneaker habit and a known affiliation with organized crime. He literally walked into a life sentence because he couldn't bring himself to wear a cheap, untraceable pair of shoes for a murder. His style was so loud it screamed, "I'm the killer," louder than any eyewitness ever could. His fashion statement became the prosecutor's closing statement. 14. As the mob begrudgingly entered the digital age, you'd think they would at least try to take cybersecurity seriously. A certain captain in the Bonanno crime family did not get that memo. He kept all his sensitive financial records. We're talking illegal rackets, shakedown payments, the entire illegal ledger, in a single password-protected computer file. When the FBI arrested him and seized his computer, they hit a digital wall. The captain, under immense pressure, couldn't remember the password. He was probably sweating, trying to recall his daughter's birthday or his favorite horse. After a while, the FBI's tech guys, likely out of sheer boredom, probably just tried the dumbest, most obvious thing they could think of. The password protecting an entire criminal enterprise? Password 123. It's so monumentally stupid it's almost brilliant, except it's not. It's just really, really stupid. 15. For 30 long years, Vincent the Chin Gigante played the long game, attempting to convince the entire world he was clinically insane to avoid prosecution. His performance was legendary, a masterclass in dedication. He'd wander the streets of New York in a tattered bathrobe and slippers, unshaven, muttering to himself, looking like he was one step away from arguing with a fire hydrant. He was the Daniel Day-Lewis of organized crime, a method actor completely committed to his role. His own crew had to hold secret meetings while he was supposedly taking a shower, just to maintain the elaborate illusion for the FBI bugs. But eventually, the feds got tired of the Broadway show. They gathered enough evidence to prove he was as sane as anyone, just with a better wardrobe for lounging. He didn't get an Oscar for his performance, but he did get a starring role in a federal prison cell for the rest of his life. 16. The mob's code of silence, omerta, is supposed to be their most sacred, unbreakable rule. Angelo Ruggiero, John Gotti's underboss, treated it more like a gentle suggestion that he was free to ignore. The FBI planted a bug in his home telephone, and what they got was a content goldmine beyond their wildest dreams. The man would not shut up. He talked about everything: murder plots, scams, his personal beef with other mobsters, probably his favorite pasta recipe. He was a one-man WikiLeaks for the Gambino crime family. The FBI agents assigned to listen to the tapes probably knew more about him than his own wife. They didn't have to conduct a complex investigation. They just had to sit back, press record, and let Angelo's mouth do all the work for them. His non-stop chatter was the single greatest gift he could have ever given to federal prosecutors. 17. You would think the #1 rule of being in a secret criminal organization is don't write down the secret criminal rules. But for one top Italian boss, this concept was apparently too advanced. When police raided the home of Salvatore Lo Piccolo, a high-ranking Sicilian mafioso, they didn't just find guns and cash. They found a typed, laminated list titled The 10 Commandments of Being a Good Wise Guy. The list included helpful tips like, don't look at your friends' wives, and always be on time for appointments. It was less of a sinister code and more of a corporate HR manual for gangsters. You can just imagine the cops reading it out loud in the evidence room, barely able to contain their laughter. He literally created a cheat sheet for the prosecution. Rule number 11 should have been, don't create a cheat sheet. 18. John Gotti, the infamous Dapper Don, loved the media, and the media loved him right back. He was a rock star of the mob world, always dressed to the nines, always ready with a witty quote for the cameras. His ego was so massive, it could have its own zip code. Unfortunately for him, the FBI also loved his media addiction. While Gotti was busy preening for reporters and cultivating his public image as an untouchable Teflon Don, the feds were quietly planting bugs everywhere he went. His endless bragging, his loud proclamations of power, and his inability to just shut up were all captured on tape. He practically live-streamed his own downfall. His ego was writing checks that his entire criminal enterprise couldn't cash, and the feds were more than happy to be the ones to collect. 19. The story of Al Capone is a timeless classic of criminal stupidity. Here is a man who built a multi-million-dollar empire on bootlegging, gambling, and violence. He was one of the most powerful and feared men in America, responsible for countless crimes. And what finally brought him down? What was the brilliant police work that ended his reign of terror? He didn't pay his taxes. It's the ultimate facepalm moment in mob history. He outsmarted rival gangs, bought off politicians, and had an army of lawyers, but he couldn't figure out how to fill out a 1040 form. It's the equivalent of successfully robbing Fort Knox and then getting arrested for double parking your getaway car. He created a legacy of bloodshed and fear, only to be taken down by a bunch of accountants in green visors. 20. They say every man has his weakness. For some, it's greed. For others, it's power. For Gennaro Jerry Lang Langella, a high-ranking boss in the Colombo family, it was pastries. Specifically, a certain type of Italian pastry from a particular bakery in his neighborhood. The FBI, knowing they were dealing with a man of refined, sugary tastes, didn't need to orchestrate a complex sting operation. They just needed to learn his snack schedule. They knew his craving for a cannoli or a sfogliatella was so powerful, so irresistible, that he couldn't stay away. So they simply waited for him at the bakery. He was arrested with powdered sugar still on his fingertips, a victim of his own sweet tooth. It's hard to look intimidating in handcuffs when you've just been busted mid-pastry. 21. The 1978 Lufthansa heist was one of the biggest cash robberies in American history. It was a masterpiece of planning and execution. The aftermath, however, was a masterclass in terrible human resources management. The mastermind, Jimmy the Gent Burke, decided that the best way to ensure silence among his crew was to, well, permanently silence them. He began systematically murdering almost everyone involved in the heist to eliminate loose ends. This, as you might imagine, drew a tremendous amount of unwanted attention from law enforcement. It's a bit like throwing a surprise party and then setting the house on fire to make sure no one talks about it. His paranoia-fueled murder spree turned a brilliant crime into a bloodbath that screamed, "Hey FBI, look over here!" 22. Nicky Scarfo, the boss of the Philadelphia crime family, was not a man known for his calm and rational leadership style. He was a walking, talking bundle of paranoia and rage. His management philosophy was simple. If you even suspect someone might be disloyal, you kill them. If they look at you funny, you kill them. If they bring you the wrong kind of coffee, you probably kill them. This strategy had an unpredictable yet apparently unforeseen side effect. His own men became so terrified of his erratic behavior that they started lining up to become government informants. It was a simple choice: face almost certain death for a minor mistake, or get a new identity and a nice, quiet life in Arizona. Scarfo didn't just dismantle his own family, he personally gift-wrapped them for the prosecution. 23. The 'Ndrangheta, one of Italy's most powerful mafias, is known for its global reach and ruthless tactics. They're also apparently aspiring food scammers. One clan decided to branch out into the lucrative world of high-end olive oil. Their brilliant plan was to buy cheap, low-grade sunflower oil from Turkey, ship it to Italy, add some chlorophyll for color, and then sell it as premium, extra virgin olive oil to unsuspecting customers in America. The scam ran for years, making them millions. And what brought it all crashing down? Not a brilliant detective, but a food critic. An American food blogger with a discerning palate tasted their premium oil and basically said, "This tastes like garbage." That one bad review triggered an investigation that unraveled the entire international operation. They were taken down by a foodie. 24. Tommy Karate. Pitera was not your average mob hitman. He was an artist of his craft, a connoisseur of killing. He was also, unfortunately for him, a meticulous record keeper. Pitera was obsessed with documenting his work, and he kept detailed manuals and diaries describing his murder techniques, body disposal methods, and the tools of his trade. When the feds finally raided his home, they found a treasure trove of self-incrimination. It was like he had written his own prosecution strategy for them. He had how-to guides for murder, complete with notes and personal reflections. He wasn't just a killer. He was a killer who wanted to make sure he got full credit for his work. His obsession with his own dark craft made him the star witness in his own trial. 25. In today's digital age, even mob fugitives want to become content creators. Mark Claude BR, a member of the Ndrangheta on the run for years, decided to start a cooking channel on YouTube. He was clever enough to always hide his face, ensuring he remained anonymous while showing off his masterful Italian recipes. But he made one critical, very specific mistake. While passionately preparing a pasta dish, he exposed his arms to the camera, revealing his distinctive tattoos. He might as well have held up his driver's license. The police, who were probably subscribed to his channel for the recipes, recognized the unique ink immediately. He was apprehended not because of a slip of the tongue, but because of a slip of the sleeve. His passion for pasta led directly to his capture, proving once again that carbs can be a killer. 26. Carmine, the Snake. Persico, the longtime boss of the Colombo crime family, was a man of immense self-confidence. He believed he was smarter than the cops, smarter than the feds, and certainly smarter than any lawyer. So when he was facing a massive racketeering trial that could put him away for life, he made a bold decision. He would represent himself. Acting as his own attorney, the Snake got to cross-examine witnesses and make impassioned speeches to the jury. The only problem was, he was a terrible lawyer. His legal strategy was a train wreck of epic proportions. The jury was not impressed by his courtroom antics, and he was found guilty on all counts, earning himself a sentence of 139 years in prison. He played himself, and in doing so, secured a permanent residency in a federal penitentiary. 27. Anthony Gaspipe. Casso was a feared underboss in the Lucchese family, known for his violent temper. He was also, it turns out, astonishingly bad at his job. Over the course of his career, he allegedly attempted to carry out 11 different mob hits. The result? 11 failures. He couldn't kill a single target he was assigned. This man's incompetence was legendary. He was less of a deadly assassin and more of a walking, talking argument for gun control. At a certain point, you have to wonder if his target survived out of sheer luck, or if Gaspipe was just catastrophically inept. His nickname should have been the Misfire. He was living proof that being a high-ranking mobster doesn't necessarily mean you're actually good at any of the mobster stuff. 28. Life imitates art, and sometimes life complains about art on an FBI wiretap. The DeCavalcante family, the New Jersey-based crew widely believed to be the real-life inspiration for The Sopranos, were apparently big fans of the show. They were also very critical viewers. The FBI had their social club bugged, and they captured hours of recordings of these real mobsters complaining about the show's inaccuracies. They'd argue about character portrayals, plot points, and whether a real wise guy would ever go to therapy. While they were busy playing TV critics and dissecting the life of Tony Soprano, they were simultaneously confessing to their own real-life crimes. They were so wrapped up in the fictional version of their lives that they completely forgot their own lives were being recorded for a much less forgiving audience. 29. Frank Funzi. Thierry, a boss of the Genovese family, tried to pull off a classic move to avoid the heat from the feds. He faked being a sick, decrepit old man. He claimed he was retired, frail, and suffering from all sorts of ailments, essentially arguing he was too feeble for prison. He would show up to court appearances looking like he was on death's door, barely able to walk. It was a decent performance, but the FBI had surveillance footage that told a different story. Their cameras caught the frail old man running up and down stairs, barking orders, and actively running his criminal empire like a man half his age. His act was exposed as a complete sham. He wasn't a feeble retiree. He was just a lazy actor who couldn't even commit to the role when he thought no one was watching. 30. Carlo Gambino was one of the most powerful and influential mob bosses in American history, the head of the sprawling Gambino crime family. His public persona, however, was that of a humble, simple man. He often pottered around his garden, dressed like a simple peasant farmer, cultivating an image of a harmless old Italian immigrant. This humble gardener act was his greatest disguise. The only problem was that this simple gardener, who supposedly lived a modest life, was regularly seen hopping into a brand new, top-of-the-line Cadillac to drive to his gardening appointments. The contrast was so ridiculous it was almost insulting. It was the mob equivalent of a billionaire pretending to be homeless but still wearing a Rolex. The humble act didn't fool the FBI for a second. 31. Transporting illegal goods like weapons and drugs is a risky business, so the Camorra came up with what they thought was a genius plan. To move their contraband without suspicion, they would stage elaborate fake funeral processions. They'd load up a coffin with guns instead of a body, hire some fake mourners to cry on cue, and drive slowly through town, immune from police stops. It was a brilliant idea at first, but their cost-cutting measures became their downfall. To save money, they started recycling the same dead guy for multiple funerals, sometimes 3 or 4 times a week. Local police eventually noticed that the same grieving family and the same deceased individual were having a funeral every other day. The scheme was so absurdly repetitive, it practically screamed for attention. 32. When you're a wanted member of the Camorra, with a rap sheet full of serious violent crimes, you'd think your top priority would be to maintain a low profile. You'd avoid any and all contact with the law. But one fugitive, Frank Thierry, apparently forgot this basic rule. While on the run for major offenses, he was caught red-handed in a supermarket. His crime? He was trying to shoplift 2 large wheels of Parmesan cheese. This wasn't a desperate act of hunger. It was a moment of pure, inexplicable stupidity. He risked his freedom, his entire life on the lam, for a bit of cheese. The police who arrested him must have been stunned. They were looking for a dangerous mafioso and instead found a petty dairy thief. It was the most anticlimactic end to a manhunt in Italian history. 33. Poisoning a rival is a classic mob move, a timeless method for dealing with your enemies. It requires precision, stealth, and, most importantly, making sure you poison the correct person. The Lucchese crime family, in one of their less brilliant moments, failed spectacularly on that last point. During a tense sit-down with a rival crew, they planned to poison the enemy boss's dinner plate. The plan was flawless, the poison was potent, everything was set. But in a moment of sheer, unadulterated incompetence, a mix-up occurred. The poisoned plate didn't go to the rival boss. Instead, it was served to one of their own high-ranking members. They successfully executed a perfect hit on themselves. You can just imagine the panic and whispered accusations at the table as their own guy started choking on his spaghetti. It wasn't just a failed hit. It was a self-inflicted wound of such epic stupidity that it deserves a place in the Moron Hall of Fame. The Mafia has a reputation for being smart, ruthless, and untouchable. That reputation is about to take a serious hit. These are 33 Mafia members who made decisions so catastrophically stupid that even the FBI could not believe their luck. We are talking about a fugitive busted by his own cooking channel, a boss caught because of a bus pass, and a hitman who signed his crime scene with his initials. Every single one of these is real. 1. In December 1978, Jimmy Burke masterminded the Lufthansa heist at JFK Airport, walking away with roughly $5.8 million in cash and jewelry, one of the biggest robberies in American history at the time. Now, Jimmy had one very simple rule for his crew after the job. Lay low, do not spend anything flashy, do not draw attention. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, the very next morning, his guys rolled up to their neighborhoods in brand new Cadillacs, draped in fur coats, flashing jewelry like they had just won the lottery. One of them reportedly bought a bright pink Cadillac, a pink one. These were guys who, the week before, could barely afford a decent steak dinner. The FBI did not need Sherlock Holmes for this one. The spending spree was so absurd that it basically painted a giant neon arrow pointing right at Burke's entire operation. 2. Mark Farron. Claude Biart was a fugitive linked to the 'Ndrangheta, one of Italy's most powerful crime organizations. He fled to the Dominican Republic and managed to stay hidden for years, living a quiet life in the Caribbean. But here is the thing about Mark. He really loved Italian cooking. so much so that he decided to launch his own YouTube channel where he showed off his culinary skills, making traditional Italian dishes. Now, to his credit, he was careful enough to never show his face on camera. Smart move. What he was not careful about, however, were his very distinctive tattoos. Every time he rolled up his sleeves to chop onions or knead dough, those unique tattoos were right there in full HD for the world to see. Italian authorities recognized them almost immediately. The man survived years on the run, only to be undone by his love for cooking content. 3. John Gotti Jr., son of the infamous Teflon Don, was supposed to carry on his father's legacy as a sharp, untouchable crime boss. Instead, he earned himself a reputation that was, well, slightly less impressive. When the FBI searched a property connected to Gotti Jr., they found something extraordinary in the basement. A neatly typed list of made members of the Gambino crime family, complete with names, ranks, and financial contributions. It was essentially a full organizational chart of one of America's most secretive criminal enterprises, folded up inside a small jewelry box. Imagine running a secret society so dangerous that members take a blood oath of silence, and then someone just types up the entire membership directory and leaves it in the basement. The FBI could not believe their luck. It was like finding a pirate's treasure map, except the pirate drew it himself and forgot to hide it. 4. Aldo Giunta was a Camorra boss from Naples who found himself on the run from Italian police. His escape plan was to catch a catamaran to Malta and disappear. But Giunta had a problem. His face was plastered all over wanted posters. So he came up with what he probably thought was a genius disguise. He put on a dress, a wig, and a pair of women's sunglasses. Now, the outfit itself was actually not terrible. The issue was that Aldo completely forgot about one very important detail on his face. His thick, unmistakable, very masculine mustache. He just left it there, fully visible, under the wig and sunglasses. Police in Pozzallo spotted him almost instantly as he tried to board the boat. One investigator later said the disguise was so bad it was almost insulting. The Camorra has done many terrifying things over the centuries, but sending a mustachioed man in a sundress to catch a ferry might be their most embarrassing moment. 5. Ignazio Lupo, known as Lupo the Wolf, was one of the most feared figures in early 20th century New York. He was suspected of dozens of murders and ran black-hand extortion rackets that terrorized Italian immigrants across Manhattan. Genuinely terrifying guy. But when it came to his side business of counterfeiting, Lupo was spectacularly bad at it. The fake bills his operation produced were so poorly made that even children could tell they were not real. The ink smudged, the paper felt wrong, and the printing was so crooked it looked like someone made them during an earthquake. But the real masterpiece of stupidity was his extortion letters. Lupo sent threatening notes demanding money from local businessmen, which is standard black hand stuff. Except he included his actual return address on the envelopes. His real one. The address where he lived. The man who was feared as the Wolf was literally mailing evidence to his own doorstep. 6. Carmine, the Snake. Persico, boss of the Colombo crime family, made legal history in the 1986 Mafia Commission trial by deciding to represent himself in court. No FBI surveillance photos existed of him, no recordings, and prosecutors had a genuinely difficult case. All Persico had to do was sit quietly and let reasonable doubt do the work. Instead, he stood up in front of the jury and started asking witnesses incredibly specific questions about the internal structure of the Colombo family. Questions that only someone who was actually running the organization would know to ask. With every question, he essentially confirmed that he understood the hierarchy, the rules, the operations, everything the prosecution was trying to prove. He did not just lose his case. He basically prosecuted himself. The jury convicted him, and he got a 100-year sentence. Somewhere, his actual lawyer was probably weeping into a briefcase. 7. Al Capone was arguably the most famous gangster in American history, a man who built a criminal empire, dodged murder charges, and ran Chicago like his personal kingdom. But in 1928, The most dangerous thing Capone encountered was not a rival gang or a federal agent. It was his own golf bag. After finishing a round of golf, Capone reached for his bag, which contained a loaded .45 caliber revolver he carried for protection. The gun went off accidentally and shot him in the leg. Some accounts say both legs and even the groin area were hit. The most powerful mobster in America had to be rushed to the hospital because he could not handle his own firearm near a golf course. The press had a field day. Here was this terrifying crime lord, the man behind the St. Valentine's Day massacre, taken out by his own pants pocket on hole 18. 8. Roberto Panunzi was nicknamed the Pablo Escobar of Europe and was considered one of the biggest cocaine traffickers on the continent, moving massive shipments between South America and Italy through his connections with the Ndrangheta. In 1994, Colombian police finally tracked him down in Medellin and moved in for the arrest. Now, Panunzi was a man used to solving problems with money, so he did what came naturally. He tried to bribe the arresting officers on the spot, reportedly offering around $1 million in cash. But here is where it fell apart. Panunzi delivered his desperate offer in a thick Calabrian Italian dialect that the Colombian officers could not understand at all. He was essentially shouting life-changing amounts of money at people who had zero idea what he was saying. They just cuffed him and moved on. Later, when an Italian officer visited him in prison, Panunzi actually bragged about the bribe attempt, apparently still not understanding why it had failed. 9. Peter Gotti, brother of the legendary John Gotti, inherited control of the Gambino crime family, but he lacked his brother's charisma and apparently his common sense. Peter was so paranoid about FBI surveillance that he banned his crew from speaking at normal volume. Seriously, he ordered all his associates to communicate exclusively by whispering directly into each other's ears. No phones, no talking, just grown men cupping their hands and leaning into each other's heads like kindergartners, sharing secrets. The problem was they were doing this on public streets, in parking lots, outside restaurants, in broad daylight. Groups of large, intimidating men huddling together and whispering into each other's ears in the middle of New York looked exactly as suspicious as you are imagining right now. FBI agents watching from surveillance vehicles did not even need microphones. They just identified every single member of Peter's crew by watching the most conspicuous whispering circle in the history of organized crime. 10. Gregory Scarpa Sr. was a feared captain in the Colombo crime family and also a secret FBI informant for decades, which already makes his life story complicated enough. But things got truly bizarre when Scarpa needed a blood transfusion after surgery in the early 1980s. He flat out refused blood from the hospital's blood bank because he was terrified of contracting HIV, which was a growing concern at the time. Instead, Scarpa insisted that only his trusted associates from the Colombo family donate blood for him, because apparently Mafia blood was safer than hospital blood. His crew lined up to give their boss the gift of life. But one of those loyal donors was carrying the HIV virus. The result was grimly ironic. By refusing the screened and tested hospital blood in favor of unscreened Mafia blood, Scarpa contracted exactly the disease he was trying to avoid. He died of complications from AIDS in 1994. It is one of the most darkly ironic twists in mob history. 11. The Camorra, Naples' infamous crime organization, once had a truly ambitious plan for drug smuggling. They decided to build their own luxury yacht, a full-sized vessel designed to transport narcotics across the Mediterranean. Guglielmo Giuliano oversaw the project at a secret shipyard, hidden inside a massive warehouse to keep the whole thing under wraps. The construction took months of work, significant manpower, and enormous amounts of money. When the yacht was finally completed, the crew prepared for the grand launch. And then, they discovered a tiny problem. The yacht was too wide to fit through the warehouse doors. Nobody, at any point during the entire construction process, had bothered to measure the exit. So there it sat, a beautiful, fully finished smuggling yacht, trapped inside its own building like a ship in a bottle, except the bottle was a concrete warehouse and the ship cost a fortune. Police eventually found it just sitting there, a monument to organized crime's most embarrassing engineering failure. 12. Joe Adonis, born Giuseppe Antonio Dotto, was a powerful mobster who helped shape the modern American Mafia alongside Lucky Luciano and Frank Costello. He was a serious, dangerous man, but he also had a weakness that was hilariously out of character: an obsessive love for his antique clock collection. When police showed up at his home with a search warrant looking for incriminating documents, Adonis did not lawyer up, did not invoke his rights, did not stay silent. Instead, he panicked. Not about the search itself, but about the possibility that the officers might scratch, bump, or otherwise damage his precious antique timepieces while rummaging through his house. So he made a deal. He confessed to several minor crimes just to get the police to wrap up the search faster and leave his clocks alone. He literally traded criminal confessions for the safety of his clock collection. Somewhere, every defense attorney in America just felt a sudden, unexplainable headache. 13. Luigi Putrone was a Sicilian mafioso who had been on the run for years, hiding in the Czech Republic under a false identity. He managed to stay completely off the radar, living a quiet, anonymous life far from the reach of Italian authorities. His cover was solid. His routine was unremarkable. He could have stayed hidden for decades. But then, one day, Luigi walked into his local supermarket and signed up for a loyalty rewards card. A basic, plastic rewards card that gives you tiny discounts on groceries. The kind of thing you throw on your keychain and forget about. But to register, the store needed personal details, and Putrone either used real information linked to his identity or data that was traceable enough to lead investigators right to him. Italian police, working with Czech authorities, followed the trail from the supermarket's database straight to his door. Years of careful hiding destroyed by a man who could not resist saving a few cents on pasta and bread. 14. Charles Gargata, known in Kansas City's underworld as Mad Dog, was a violent enforcer tied to the local mafia throughout the 1930s and 1940s. He was involved in murders, bootlegging, and all the usual mob activities. But on one particular job, Gargata made a mistake so perfectly stupid that it almost reads like a comedy sketch. He left his hat at the crime scene. Now, criminals leaving items behind happens. That is why forensics exists. But Gargata's hat was special. Stitched inside the brim, in clear and legible lettering, were his initials. He had his name sewn into his hat like a child heading off to summer camp. When police arrived and found the hat sitting there, they did not need fingerprints, witnesses, or weeks of detective work. They just checked the label, matched the initials, and had their suspect before lunch. Charles Mad Dog Gargata, feared enforcer, taken down by a personalized fashion accessory. 15. Alphonse. Little Al Darko was the acting boss of the Lucchese crime family in the early 1990s, a man who had spent decades in the mafia and survived gang wars, betrayals, and FBI crackdowns. He was as tough and street smart as they come. So what finally broke him? A guy adjusting his collar. One day, Darko looked out a window and saw a fellow mafioso casually adjusting his shirt collar. That was it. That one gesture sent Darko into a full paranoid spiral. He became absolutely convinced that the collar adjustment was a secret signal, a coded message to a hidden hit squad that meant, "Kill Darko now." In reality, the guy probably just had an itchy neck. But Darko did not wait to find out. He immediately contacted the FBI and offered to become an informant, spilling decades worth of Lucchese family secrets. His testimony led to the conviction of over 50 mobsters, all because someone fixed their collar. 16. Thomas Agro, known as Tommy A, was a Gambino crime family member who ran major gambling operations and was widely feared for his violent temper. He had a reputation for personally delivering brutal beatings to anyone who crossed him or failed to pay. The problem was that Tommy had severe asthma, so during these violent attacks, he would frequently have to stop mid-beating, pull out his inhaler, take several deep puffs, catch his breath, and then resume the assault. Imagine being beaten by a mobster who keeps pausing to use medical equipment. The victim is on the ground. Tommy is hunched over, wheezing, reaching for his inhaler, and then, after a couple of pumps, he straightens up and goes right back to work. It is simultaneously one of the most terrifying and most ridiculous images in organized crime history. His associates reportedly dreaded going on jobs with him because the asthma breaks made everything take twice as long. 17. When Sicilian police arrested Salvatore Lo Piccolo in 2007, they expected to find weapons, cash, maybe encrypted communications. What they did not expect to find was a printed-out, neatly formatted list titled The 10 Commandments of the Mafia, tucked inside his briefcase like a corporate employee handbook. The rules included gems like never look at the wives of other members, always be available for the organization even if your wife is about to give birth, and never be seen with cops. Lo Piccolo, who had been running a significant portion of the Sicilian Mafia, was literally carrying the rulebook around with him. A secret criminal organization that relies entirely on silence, loyalty, and leaving no evidence had a boss who walked around with a printed copy of the membership guidelines. Police were thrilled. The media was thrilled. Defense attorneys were significantly less thrilled. It was like catching a spy with a laminated card that says, "I am a spy," in his front pocket. 18. Edgardo Greco was a convicted killer linked to the 'Ndrangheta, who went on the run in 2006 and managed to stay hidden for 16 years. He eventually settled in Saint-Étienne, France, where he reinvented himself as a pizza chef at an Italian restaurant. For years, it worked perfectly. New identity, quiet life, good pizza. But then Greco's ego got the better of him. A local French newspaper ran a story about the restaurant, and Greco, unable to resist the spotlight, gave an interview where he proudly boasted about his authentic Italian recipes and his passion for traditional cooking. The article included his photo. Italian investigators, who had been tracking his support network since 2019, recognized him almost immediately. 16 years of successful hiding, a completely new life in a different country, and he threw it all away because he wanted a newspaper to know how good his pizza was. The man literally posed for his own wanted poster. 19. Nicodemo, Little Nicky. Scarfo became boss of the Philadelphia Mafia in 1981 and almost immediately turned the organization into a paranoid nightmare. Scarfo was so suspicious of everyone around him that he started ordering murders of his own members for the smallest perceived slights. A wrong look, a misinterpreted comment, a moment of hesitation, any of these could get you killed under Scarfo's leadership. The result was entirely predictable. His own people, terrified that they could be next for literally any reason, started lining up to become FBI informants. His nephew, Phil Leonetti, flipped. Nicholas Caramandi flipped. Thomas Del Giorno flipped. Half the Philadelphia family went running to the federal government because working with the FBI was genuinely safer than working for Nicky Scarfo. He managed to do what decades of law enforcement pressure could not. He single-handedly destroyed his own crime family from the inside, not through any clever FBI operation, but through pure, unhinged paranoia. 20. Mickey Cohen was the king of the Los Angeles underworld in the 1940s and 1950s, a man who controlled gambling, bookmaking, and organized crime on the entire West Coast. He was also a man with severe obsessive-compulsive disorder. Cohen washed his hands up to 50 times a day. He changed his clothes multiple times daily. Every surface around him had to be spotless. His homes were immaculate. And here's where it gets beautiful for law enforcement. That same obsessive need for order extended to his finances. Cohen kept meticulous, detailed, perfectly organized records of every dollar he earned and spent. Every transaction documented, every receipt saved. It was a tax auditor's dream come true. When the IRS came after him, they did not need to dig through hidden accounts or decode secret ledgers. Mickey had done all the work for them. He was convicted of tax evasion and sent to prison, his criminal empire undone by the same compulsive tidiness that kept his bathroom sparkling. 21. Joe Valachi was a low-ranking soldier in the Genovese crime family serving time in federal prison in Atlanta in 1962. He had become increasingly paranoid that his boss, Vito Genovese, had put a hit on him. One day, in the prison yard, Valaki spotted a man he was convinced was the assassin sent to kill him. Without hesitation, he grabbed a 2-foot iron pipe from a nearby construction area and attacked the man, beating him to death. There was just one problem. It was the wrong guy. The victim was John Joseph Sopp, a random prisoner who had absolutely nothing to do with the Mafia or any contract on Valachi's life. Now facing a murder charge with zero leverage, Valachi made a decision that changed organized crime forever. He became the first major Mafia member to publicly testify about the inner workings of Cosa Nostra before the United States Senate. Decades of Mafia secrecy, broken because one paranoid guy swung a pipe at a complete stranger. 22. Domenico Rancadore, known as the Professor, was a Sicilian Mafia boss who vanished from Italy and spent roughly 20 years living a quiet, hidden life in suburban London under a false name. He married a British woman, blended into the community, and for all practical purposes had completely disappeared from law enforcement's radar. His cover was airtight. Then Rancadore did something spectacularly ill-advised. As he approached his mid-60s, he decided to apply for a free bus pass for senior citizens, a benefit offered to London residents of a certain age. To complete the application, he used his wife's real personal details, which connected directly back to their home address. Italian and British investigators who had been searching for him for years traced those details straight to his quiet suburban house. 20 years of perfect anonymity, destroyed because a fugitive Mafia boss wanted to save money on public transportation. He could have just paid the bus fare. 23. Frankie Locke. Locascio was a high-ranking member of the Gambino crime family and underboss to John Gotti. In 1992, both men went to trial together based largely on secretly recorded conversations from Gotti's headquarters. The tapes were devastating. Gotti could be heard openly discussing murders, criminal operations, and family business in shocking detail. And sitting right there next to him during many of those conversations was Frank Locascio, who said almost nothing. He just sat there, quietly, occasionally nodding. The prosecution argued that Locaccio's silence during these discussions constituted agreement and participation in the criminal conspiracy. The jury agreed. Frank Locascio was convicted on racketeering and conspiracy charges and received a life sentence. He was essentially found guilty of sitting in a room and not objecting. It is possibly the most expensive silence in legal history, and a brutal reminder that in criminal law, sometimes saying nothing says everything. 24. Vincent Asaro was an old-school member of the Bonanno crime family, who had been connected to serious organized crime for decades, including the infamous 1978 Lufthansa heist. Despite being a suspect for years, Asaro managed to beat the Lufthansa charges at trial in 2015. He was acquitted, free, and clear. He walked out of that courtroom a free man in his early 80s, having survived one of the most high-profile mob cases in American history. So what did he do with his hard-won freedom? He got into a road rage incident. Some random driver cut him off in traffic, and Asaro, rather than just cursing under his breath like a normal person, ordered his grandson to go burn the driver's car. They set the vehicle on fire, were caught almost immediately, and both pleaded guilty to arson charges. Decades of dodging federal cases, a historic acquittal, and an entire lifetime of criminal experience, all wasted because an 82-year-old man could not handle being cut off in traffic. 25. Salvatore, Sammy the Bull. Gravano was the underboss of the Gambino crime family and the most powerful mafia turncoat in American history. In 1991, he flipped on John Gotti and testified against him, leading to Gotti's conviction. In exchange, Gravano received a reduced sentence, entered the Witness Protection Program, and was given a completely new identity and a fresh start in Arizona. A clean slate. A second chance at life that most criminals would kill for, and some literally did. So naturally, Gravano used his fresh start to build the largest ecstasy distribution ring in the state of Arizona, running a multi-million-dollar drug operation with his own son. Federal agents were stunned. The man who had been given the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card had voluntarily walked right back into the game. He was arrested, pleaded guilty, and went back to prison. Sammy the Bull had beaten the Mafia, beaten the federal government, and then beaten himself. 26. Angelo. Quack Quack. Ruggiero earned his nickname for a very good reason. The man simply could not stop talking. As a captain in the Gambino crime family, Ruggiero was explicitly warned multiple times by senior members that the FBI had wiretaps on his phones. John Gotti himself told Ruggiero to shut up. Neil Della Croce told him to shut up. Everyone told him to shut up. Angelo did not shut up. He continued making phone calls lasting hours, openly discussing drug deals, criminal operations, internal family politics, and just about everything the FBI could ever want to hear. The recordings from Ruggiero's phone became some of the most damaging evidence in Gambino family history. His conversations helped trigger a chain of events that eventually brought down multiple high-ranking members. Angelo Quack Quack Ruggiero was essentially a one-man wiretapping program, generously providing the FBI with evidence they could not have obtained any other way. 27. Enrico Ponzo was a fugitive associate of the New England Mafia who went on the run in the late 1990s after being indicted on racketeering and attempted murder charges. He fled across the country and ended up in rural Marsing, Idaho, where he reinvented himself as a humble cattle rancher and family man. For over a decade, it worked beautifully. He blended into the small-town community, raised animals, and kept a low profile. Well, mostly low, because Ponzo had one fatal flaw. He could not resist dropping hints about his past. He reportedly made comments to neighbors about his connections back east, talked a little too much about his knowledge of certain people in New York, and generally gave off vibes that did not quite match a small-town Idaho rancher. When the FBI finally caught up to him in 2011, they found 38 firearms, $15,000 in cash, and a 100-ounce bar of precious metal in his home. Not exactly standard farming equipment. 28. Thomas Patera, known as Tommy Karate for his martial arts skills, was a Bonanno crime family soldier suspected by law enforcement of as many as 60 murders during the 1980s. He was a calculated, methodical killer, which makes his one big habit even more baffling. Patera kept trophies. After each murder, he would take jewelry from his victims, rings, necklaces, watches, and store them in his home. Not hidden in a secret vault, not buried somewhere, just kept in his apartment, reportedly in boxes like a disturbing personal collection. When the FBI raided his home, they found over 60 pieces of victim jewelry sitting right there. Each piece was essentially a direct link to a specific murder, a physical catalog of his crimes neatly organized under his own roof. For a man who dismembered bodies and went to extreme lengths to hide evidence of his kills, keeping a souvenir box of victim jewelry at home was a staggeringly stupid contradiction that handed prosecutors exactly what they needed. 29. Michael Mikey Scars. De Leonardo was a captain in the Gambino crime family, a well-respected and powerful figure in one of America's most dangerous organizations. His downfall was not an FBI sting, not a rival gang, not a reckless crime. It was his love life. De Leonardo left his wife for a mistress, which, in normal society, is just a messy personal decision. But in the Mafia, where family values are treated with almost religious seriousness, it was a scandal. The Gambino leadership came down on him hard, essentially shunning him for violating the code of marital loyalty. This, coming from an organization that routinely committed murder, extortion, and every other crime imaginable, but drew the line at divorce. De Leonardo, furious at what he saw as outrageous hypocrisy, decided that if the Mafia was going to treat him like an outcast over a relationship, he might as well go talk to the FBI. And talk he did. He became a prolific informant, testifying against multiple high-ranking members, including John Gotti Jr. The Gambino family essentially created their own worst enemy over a domestic dispute. 30. Louis Lepka. Buchalter was the head of Murder Incorporated, the most feared assassination squad in American organized crime during the 1930s. He controlled a network of professional killers and was one of the most wanted men in the country. When the pressure became unbearable, A trusted associate convinced Lepka that if he surrendered directly to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, a deal had been arranged and he would receive immunity on the most serious charges. It was a lie. There was no deal. On August 24, 1939, Lepka voluntarily walked up to Hoover on a Manhattan street and turned himself in, fully expecting to walk free after some minor charges. Instead, he was prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. On March 4, 1944, Louis Lepka Buchalter was executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing Prison, making him the only major organized crime boss in American history to receive the death penalty. All because he trusted the wrong friend. 31. Luigi Baby Shacks. Minocchio was the boss of the Patriarca crime family, the dominant mafia organization in New England. By the time he reached his 80s, most mob bosses in his position would have delegated the day-to-day operations entirely, staying far from anything that could attract attention. Not Luigi. At 83 years old, Minocchio was still personally, physically showing up at local strip clubs to collect small extortion payments. We are not talking about millions here. These were relatively modest protection payments from establishments like the Cadillac Lounge. He would just walk in, an 83-year-old crime boss, collect his envelope, and leave. He did this routinely, like it was a part-time retirement job. Federal agents barely had to work for this one. They just waited for the elderly gentleman to make his monthly rounds and arrested him during a massive organized crime sweep in 2011. Over 100 people were taken down that day, and the boss himself was caught doing something any low-level associate could have handled. 32. Bernardo Provenzano, known as the Tractor, was the boss of bosses of the Sicilian Mafia and one of the most wanted fugitives in Italian history. He managed to evade capture for an absolutely staggering 43 years, hiding in plain sight across Sicily while still running the entire Cosa Nostra through handwritten notes called pizzini. For over 4 decades, the most powerful police forces in Europe could not find him. So what finally brought him down? Laundry. Provenzano's wife, Severia, regularly sent packages of clean clothes and fresh linens to her husband from their home in Corleone. In 2006, Italian police intercepted communications about these deliveries and decided to simply follow the laundry courier. The courier led them straight to a farmhouse outside Corleone, where Provenzano was hiding. 43 years of evading every law enforcement agency imaginable, and the man got caught because he needed his wife to wash his shirts. 33. Tony Accardo, known as Joe Batters and the Big Tuna, was arguably the most successful mob boss in American history. He led the Chicago outfit for decades and, remarkably, never spent a single night in prison. In 1978, while Accardo was away on vacation, a crew of burglars broke into his River Forest mansion and stole cash, jewelry, and personal items. For any normal person, this would be a frustrating insurance claim. For Accardo, it was a personal insult that demanded a very specific kind of response. He ordered the systematic elimination of everyone connected to the burglary. Over the following months, members of the burglary crew started turning up dead across Chicago, approximately 10 people in total. No one was ever charged for the killings. But the string of connected murders drew massive FBI attention directly to Accardo and the outfit, generating investigations and scrutiny that the organization had successfully avoided for years. The man who had spent a lifetime being invisible lit himself up like a Christmas tree because someone stole his silverware. Those were 33 Mafia members who proved that a life of crime does not require a life of brains. But here is the thing. I know we missed some. There is no way this list covers every dumb mobster who ever lived. So if you know a Mafia member who is even dumber than anyone on this list, drop their name and their story in the comments. I want to see who we left out. And if we get enough good ones, there might be a part 2. Hit subscribe so you do not miss it and leave a like on your way out.